We made this.
You're listening to Free with this month's issue. As always, please support the bands and artists featured in each episode by buying their records and going to their gigs. Each episode will be adding all available tracks to our ongoing Spotify playlist, which you can find on wedigpodcast.com. You can also find our other episodes and podcasts there. If you want to agree with us or more likely argue with us or even appear in a future episode, you can find us on Twitter at This Month's Issue and Facebook at Free with This Month's Issue. Also, if you enjoy the podcast, then let people know. Like, subscribe, review it on iTunes, tattoo it on your forehead, etc. Right, let's get on with it then. Welcome to Free with this month's issue, which may confuse people if you listen to this on the CHUCKYVISION feed, because this is a crossover episode. This is going out on both feeds. So for those of you that haven't listened to Free with this month's issue before, I'm Colin. This is a podcast where usually we listen to an old free CD from magazines like Kerrang, Metal Hammer, Q, Enemy, that kind of thing, with my normal co-host Ian, who's on paternity leave at the moment, and a different guest, including Mark from CHUCKYVISION, at one point in the past and another one in the future, and basically discover the horrors and delights within. But this month, this is a crossover episode with CHUCKYVISION. So Mark and Dev are the guests this month.
Woohoo!
Hello.
Hiya. Hello.
Do you guys want to tell the Free with this month's issue listeners all about CHUCKYVISION?
Go for it, Dev.
CHUCKYVISION is the podcast that covers all things Chucky. We've covered the first 7 movies. We did that before season 1 of the sci-fi television series. We covered every episode of that, and we've been waiting rather impatiently for season 2, which will now be starting at the start of October. And between then, we've just been doing all things Chucky. We've been doing other haunted little doll movies. We've been doing appearances of Chucky on TV, just all sorts of random guff. And if people think, for the Free of this month's issue fandom, if people think we're going to be talking movies all day, no, we've got a lot of new metal and butt rock to get through today.
Butt rock.
We have.
I say that as a 100% compliment.
Yeah, so just to clarify for anyone that's thinking, I didn't know there was that much media featuring the ginger one out of Rugrats. This is Chucky from Child's Play, the killer doll.
To be fair, most people don't know there's that much media featuring Chucky from Child's Play. A lot of people say there were 7 films. There's a television series. There's a podcast.
But there's only one of the films, as far as I know, that has a soundtrack which leans itself into the Free with this month's issue format. So what are we talking about on today's episode, guys?
We are talking about music from and inspired by the film Bride of Chucky. My personal favourite of the Chucky films, and the soundtrack was probably what made that film so iconic, in my opinion.
I reckon so, yeah. So it came out in October 1998, and yeah, it's basically, as Dev said, it's mostly sort of new metal and a bit of sort of grungy butt rock type stuff.
I've never heard this term butt rock before. What the fuck's butt rock?
It's just an all-encapsulating term for this kind of music, because as we'll get into it, there are a surprising amount of subgenres within this album. The music in this swings all over the place. But
so you mean 90s
rock...
tap, basically?
Yeah, it's tap, but good tap.
Do you know where the term originally came from? It's a term to describe the music that was played on American radio stations who played nothing but rock. Was where it came from.
No way.
That is where
I
the
thought
term
it was a
originally...
reference to bottoms.
Well, that's what it then evolved into, basically. Sort of post-grungy type stuff like Godsmack and Nickelback and Creed and all that kind of bollocks.
I mean, that's what this album is. I hear all of this and I recognise the sound.
Yeah.
And so there's some big bands in this, but then, of course, there's those other bands where I'm like, I don't know who the fuck these people are, but they got on an album for a movie.
There's not many that I didn't know on there. I think there's only one, actually, in fact. But yeah, so because it's a crossover with CHUCKYVISION, there's some stuff that you guys need to do first, isn't there?
We basically ask 3 questions of our guests about their experience of Chucky. So, Colin, question number 1. How did you first encounter Chucky?
I think this was the first Child's Play film I actually saw, but he was pretty inescapable in media, unfortunately, in the early 90s. He was like an iconic horror villain with Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers and and all that lot. But unfortunately, it's going to be the fucking tabloid bollocks about blaming Child's Play 3 for small people getting killed by idiots.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. But that's where it would have got into my conscience originally. But then I ignored all that and then watched the films later on and was like, I didn't kill anyone. Not based on this film anyway.
We have thought about discussing that further because it was essentially completely and utterly disproved.
Yeah.
The kids hadn't even seen Child's Play 3. But we decided that because it was such a sensitive subject in Britain still, because of the nature of the crime that was blamed on the Chucky films, that we just did like a little disclaimer at the start of our Child's Play 3 episode.
Yeah, makes sense.
I wanted to very much emphasise that it was completely debunked, but I was advised by someone probably wiser than me just to be polite.
I haven't listened to that episode in a while, but I think, as brief as we were, I think we did put our foot down pretty decisively. That how debunked it was.
But I think it's really fucking sad that that's anyone's first encounter with Chucky, and I think anyone around our age, Colin, it might be.
Yeah. Was it about 93-ish?
91, yeah.
91?
The movie was, yeah.
Yeah, so I was about 10, 11, 12-ish, depending on when the actual tabloid bollocks happened. I was definitely seeing Freddy Krueger in windows of video shops, and I definitely remember seeing Chucky posters and stuff as well around that time. And just thinking, cool, when I'm older I'm going to watch that, but there's no way that my mum and dad will let me yet.
Yeah, my parents were super strict in the early 90s as well. I think that's kind of helped formulate my opinion that absolutely nothing should be censored, but age restrictions should be heavily enforced.
Yeah, sometimes. Depends what it's on. I think it's down to what the kid can cope with. Showed my 6-year-old daughter The Goonies the other day, which has got loads of swearing in it. Way more than I remembered. And it's just like... She knows what the words are. She knows not to say them at school or when her granny's around. It's fine.
Anyway, second question. I think you've already actually said the answer to it. What's your favourite Chucky film?
I have already said it, yeah. Bride of Chucky, which is good, because that's the soundtrack we're talking about today.
Have you seen all 7 of the Chucky films?
I haven't, no. I've seen up and as far as Bride of Chucky, and I haven't seen 2 or 3 for quite a while, probably about 5 or 6 years. I am planning on rewatching all of them so I can listen along with the podcast, but I haven't had fucking time yet. But yeah, I love the humour in Bride of Chucky. What's the third question then?
What's your favourite Chucky moment?
I love all of the little meta bits of humour in Bride of Chucky. So the references to other horror franchises, like the bit where somebody gets killed with lots of nails sticking out of their face, and they look quite a lot like Pinhead from Hellraiser. Right, can I wrestle control back now then?
Yes, you should. Let's listen to some 90s pop rock.
Fuck off, I'm taking back control, because there's another bit I have to do before that of the context.
Oh, okay.
Fucking trying to take over, fuck's sake.
I was just looking forward to butt rock, that's all.
We'll get there. We'll get there. So, October 1998, for some context. Music news. The Recording Industry Association of America files in court against Diamond Multimedia in an attempt to block the release of their new MP3 player, arguing that MP3 digital audio player is a music piracy device. The application's denied, clearing the way for the PMP300 to become the first commercially successful MP3 player, and basically changing the face of music listening as we know it. Also, nearly all legal stuff this month. The Copyright Term Extension Act is signed into law, giving the entertainment industry 20 more years of exclusive rights to all works created since 1923. Also, Ian Brown, the fucking bellend from the Stone Roses, is jailed for threatening behaviour towards an air stewardess. Albums released that month: The Cardigans' Gran Turismo, Ash Nuclear Sounds, Cypress Hill 4, Less Than Jake, Hello Rockview, Queens of the Stone Age self-titled record, Placebo, Without You I'm Nothing, Fatboy Slim, You've Come a Long Way Baby, Afghan Wigs 1965, R.E.M. Up, Napalm Death, Words from the Exit Wound. On tour that month was Muse, who were playing tiny venues like little local pubs, The Cure, Terrorvision, Blondie, R.E.M., Manson, Motorhead, Mark Lanegan, Placebo, Black Crowes and Dio. The UK number 1 single was Roller Coaster by Bewitched, and the UK number 1 album was Manic Street Preachers' This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours. obviously, this is a film, so I can't do anything about what was in the magazine. So, shall we get on with listening to it?
I do have a little context, because I do love your little context moments. A little movie context, I guess. Because
Okay.
You mentioned Child's Play 3 and you mentioned Bride of Chucky, and there was a very big turning point in horror between them. By 1996, Scream came out.
Yes.
And suddenly every slasher was different because of that. Just coming up to Bride, we have Scream 2 in 1997. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Campfire Tales, Disturbing Behaviour, The Faculty, Halloween H2O, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer in 98, Urban Legend, Idle Hands, and then Bride of Chucky in 1998. So in just a couple years, every slasher was becoming horror at this point, since in Child's Play 3, which was 91, I mean, you mentioned Freddy and Jason. I mean, pretty much every horror franchise was in the dumps at that point.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the studios felt like the slasher genre was dead. And then along came Wes Craven's Scream. And now suddenly slashers were hip and down with the kids. And that really ties into this soundtrack, because the finger was on the generational pulse. And it's weird that we don't get a soundtrack like this with any of the later films. Yeah, this film was so cultural in the way that all the other films weren't.
A lot of the other films that you mentioned also had similar rock soundtrack albums as well.
Yeah.
Like The Faculty and Ginger Snaps, I think, had a really good one like that.
Yeah.
There were a lot of sort of new metal-y type compilation-y soundtrack albums out around that sort of time. A lot of them with Graham Revell doing the incidental music as well. He's got one track on here, but he did all the incidental music in the film that's not featured.
So, I did no research. You two did lots.
As usual.
But what I will say is, by 1998, I had seen all of those films. And I owned maybe 25 to 30% of the albums you mentioned. And I went to the TerrorVision tour in 1998, and it was great. He was incredibly drunk and nearly fell on his tits when he did the one that goes,
Oblivion.
He did this crazy-ass dance. Yeah, Oblivion.
Yeah. TerrorVision still are fucking brilliant live.
They are one of the
Absolutely
only acts that I would actively want the lead singer to be drunk for, because it was a hell of a gig when he was hammered.
Good old Tony. They were known for drinking a lot around that time. Quite famously, TerrorVision won a Kerrang Award and were so drunk they left it on a park bench on the way home.
Brilliant.
And lost it somewhere. But yeah, right,
Brilliant.
Let's get going with the CD.
Mother, from her shrine I have crawled.
So track one, opening with a big well-known banger. It's the Screaming Cheetah Wheelies and Boogie King. This is the only band on the entire album that I had to look up who the fuck they were. And it's track one, which is really bizarre.
It really sets the tone for how this soundtrack doesn't have a consistent tone. This is not a song I think of when I think of Chucky.
No.
And yet it's so prominent. It's in the credits. I watched the movie again, and this is the song that plays as soon as the movie ends.
This is played twice in the film.
Yeah.
Because it's played. It's in the car when they're driving to the prom at the start, and it's also it's the first end credits song. I suspect, because there's two major omissions of songs that aren't on this soundtrack album but were featured really prominently in the film. The film opens, not quite opens, but very near the start of the film is Living Dead Girl by Rob Zombie.
It's an iconic scene, that, where I do feel like, what the fuck are they doing? They've actually, they've clearly worked with Rob Zombie, because, spoilers, the next track is Rob Zombie. But why the fuck did they not have Living Dead Girl on this soundtrack album?
Well, I've got a few theories about that. There's already two Rob Zombie-related tracks on the CD. I think Geffen Records probably wouldn't allow them to have a third. Hellbilly Deluxe, the album that Living Dead Girl came from, only came out about 2 months before. So loads of people are going to see that film and go, I need that Living Dead Girl song. So Geffen obviously want them to buy Hellbilly Deluxe rather than buy the Bride of Chucky soundtrack, which isn't on Geffen Records.
Ah.
Also, later on, they released Living Dead Girl as a single, and it would have harmed sales for that. I think it was the following February it was released as a single.
So it was that new that it wasn't appropriate to put it on the set. Good grief.
The album was less than 2 months old at the time that came out, yeah. We'll get more onto that in a minute. The Screaming Cheetah Wheelies were predominantly a sort of blues rock band. This was them at their most sort of almost metal, sort of hard rock. It's basically like a shit version of Monster Magnet. But you've got the proper good version of Monster Magnet a few tracks later. So the only thing I can think of is some member of the Screaming Cheetah Wheelies had some kind of info on somebody at Universal Pictures that they did not want releasing.
Oh, come on.
There's
this track.
There's no other way.
I've never heard of the fucking Screaming Cheetah Wheelies, but I genuinely think that this riff at the start is a great way to start the album and set the tone for what you can expect.
But think about it this way. This was 1998. This was the height of front-loading albums with the biggest track, because people would go to a listening post in a record shop, they'd play it, and if they didn't like the first track, they'd fuck off somewhere else. This album has got, spoilers for the rest of the episode, White Zombie, Cold Chamber, Monster Magnet, Judas Priest, Typo Negative, Slayer, Bruce Dickinson, Motorhead. All of those are on here, all of whom would sell way more records than Screaming Cheetah Wheelies, who no fucker knows who they are. I was listening to some of their other stuff to see if they were any good on Spotify. They've got there's a live album on there where they play like inferior covers of Dr. John's Right Place, Wrong Time and Edwin Starr's 25 Miles, which are both amazing songs, but they play it in such a fucking leaden, clod-hopping way that it's like... Have you ever seen Ghost World?
Great film.
Yeah, so the bit where Steve Buscemi's character gets dragged along to this blues bar to see a blues band, and it turns out that it's a band called Blues Hammer, and they're essentially a rock band absolutely fucking butchering blues songs. That's what Screaming Cheetah Wheelies reminds me of.
I think you are right on the money about the Rob Zombie album coming out around the same time, because the album this song is on, Big Wheel, also came out in 1998.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that they knew, or Universal knew, or someone knew, that this song was going to make more money being on this than it was on their own album.
Definitely. There's no way that people are going to have heard this and gone, oh, I must get that Screaming Cheetah Wheelies album.
But I did exactly that.
Did
I
you?
liked this track, so I bought the Screaming Cheetah Wheelies album, and it was terrible. This track is fucking great, though.
Did you buy it at the time?
Yes, and it was awful.
Amazing.
But this track's brilliant, and I loved this track, and I will go to my grave defending this track. It's got a great riff, makes me nod my head, and I think it's a great way to start this album. Bollocks to you both.
Mark, you are the exception that proves the rule. Well done.
Great, yeah. I will just say this line on Wikipedia for the Cheetah Wheelies. It said, Boogie Night, a song as much at home in the mosh pit as cruising the local drag. And that's not in quotes. That's just on Wikipedia as a line.
They've written that themselves. We come across this a lot when we're looking up lesser-known bands on Wikipedia for the podcast. There's quite often you read it and you go, this is a fucking press release. The band have written this themselves.
And I think what this actually does show is that we picked the right CD and the right podcast to talk about it on, because this does feel like it's wild kind of levels of what the fuckism are on this album. It's like one of the CDs you look at on Free With This Month's issue. The wildly fluctuating quality and genres is just flabbergasting. So I'm delighted that our podcasts have actually managed to kind of meld in a way that I never thought possible.
It fits nicely, I think. Let's go for the next one, which is an absolute fucking banger. So this is White Zombie and Thunderkiss 65. This is a brilliant bit in the film where Chucky's skipping around the radio going all this modern music shit, and then this song comes on from 6 years previously, and he's like, no, this is real music, and it's White Zombie. He's fucking right, White Zombie are amazing.
Yeah, they are.
This would have been, for me, a much better opening track on the CD. Keep Screaming Cheetah Wheelies on there, but put them later on in the CD somewhere. It's interesting because, like I was saying about Rob Zombie's Hellbilly Deluxe only been released less than 2 months before. This is from 2 White Zombie albums ago. So I think Geffen were like, yeah, we don't want you to have anything off Astro Creep either. Have something off The Sexorcisto. Which is fine because both albums are fucking amazing. Obviously, Astro Creep 2000, Songs of Love, Destruction and Other Synthetic Delusions, The Electric Head, is the greatest metal album of all time. And I will not be taking further questions on that. Yeah, it's fucking great. Thunderkiss 65 was White Zombie's breakthrough song in the USA, at least. They were always a bit of a cult act over here, but they were fucking massive in the States. Basically, this song, on its 3rd release as a single, was finally picked up by Beavis and Butthead originally. So it got a little clip where they're watching the videos and commenting on it, and they fucking loved it. And from that, Headbangers Ball started playing it all of the time. And it got to the extent that White Zombie were one of the main bands that got featured on Headbangers Ball. There was a series of Headbangers Ball where on the first episode they had Rob Zombie in there to like paint a mural on the wall for their scenery. And he deliberately took his time on it so he could be there for the entire series rather than finishing it on the first episode, which was originally planned. And it totally propelled made their profile go right up, which is great. I fucking love them. This particular album, The Sexorcisto, was a CD that was like, at the time I think you could only get on import, and there was a guy at our school who had a copy, and it was like sort of passed around all the metalheads in our school like a sort of mythical object. So it was like, your turn for it, right, tape it, there we go, hand it on to someone else. The other thing is, in between the film obviously being made and this soundtrack album and the movie being released, White Zombie actually finally split up. They'd not done anything for about 3 years, but when this came out, they'd been split up for about 2 or 3 weeks. They just finally announced it.
I think if we can't have Living Dead Girl, White Zombie's best track is a acceptable replacement to me.
It's not their best track, but it's fucking brilliant.
It's definitely their best track. This song is iconic to me. In 1998, again, put it into context for me personally, I was very heavily on the rock scene in Manchester. And by heavily on the rock scene in Manchester, what I actually mean is I went to Jilly's Rock World every Friday night. And this was played every single week there. And I mean, considering I have not had hair since I was 27, people might be surprised to know that at this point I had hair down to my arse. And without fail, every week I would whirl my hair to Thunderkiss 65 in Jilly's Rock World, and it was like the best of times. This song I've got so much love for this track. So much love.
Is this one you were familiar with before, Dev?
Yeah, oh fuck yeah. Me and Mark both love Rob Zombie, and I really love White Zombie as well, yeah.
Cool.
It's a really good track to use in this, and a lot of the songs in this film are used basically as transitions in the film. Like, I think most of the songs in the film are just when the van is driving from one place to another.
There's a lot of that, yeah.
You hear the opening riff and that's about it. This song is diegetically used because Chucky literally headbangs to it and says, this is good music.
Which is correct. Right, should we go for the next track? This is Cold Chamber and Blisters. This was the B-side to the UK-only Loco single, released in late 1997. This, according to the CD, does not feature in the movie. However, it is It's really quietly in the background when they're parked outside a bar at one point, just after there's been a fight with a cop. You can just about hear it.
Yeah, I was really confused because I was using a website that lists when the songs are used.
That is fictional. I started using that.
Yeah, very briefly, all it says for this one is Chucky smokes a cigar.
Yeah.
Which he doesn't, it's a joint.
And it's not in that scene. It's near that scene. But you cannot hear any music at all in that scene. But yeah, when there's an outdoor shot, it's playing at the bar in the background. This is one of those sort of creepy, slithery nu metal tracks. And as I said on a few previous episodes, I think, of Free With This Month's issue, Cold Chamber were objectively rubbish. But when they're
I'm so glad you said that. Because I was about to say, this is the weakest track on the album, and the riff is just a blatant theft of Shove It by the Deftones. It's awful, this track.
This predates Shove It by the Deftones.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Well, they did it better.
Anyway, what I was just saying there is they're objectively rubbish, but I fucking loved them when their first record and this single came out. I went off them a bit for the second album, but I
just can't see how this B-side got anywhere near this soundtrack, because the rest of, compared to the vast majority of the rest of it, it's bloody awful.
All right, Screaming Cheetah Wheelies fan.
The Screaming Cheetah Wheelies track was so much more catchy than this drivel.
This is you need light and shade on a record, and this is one of the few. Yeah, it's one of the only sort of slow, creepy type tracks on there, whereas a lot of the rest of it is just in-your-face metal bangers. So this gives it some contrast.
I think I would have been happy with just pure in-your-face metal bangers.
There are some fucking weird lyrics in it. There's a lyric that, according to the internet, isn't this, but I'm absolutely sure he says, "Can't sleep inside of my foreskin," which...
I mean, he is American.
I mean, it's an interesting statement. There's also, he's definitely saving up all his sheep for sin, which he definitely does say. I don't know what sin he's planning on doing with the sheep, but it's
I think we can hazard a guess, Colin.
Yeah. Everyone's got to have a hobby, I suppose.
Terrible, terrible track.
What do you think about this one, Dev?
It's definitely... I expected more of this on the album. I mean, maybe a bit more lively. But yeah, I definitely expected more new metal. And but it is a bit dirgy. I agree with you guys. It's a bit slow. There's not much action to it. I read a quote here that says, "Des Fafara established the no-nonsense side of new metal." That's not what we need here. Bride of Chucky is objectively silly and upbeat and funny.
There's fucking there's loads of nonsense in Cold Chamber. Their lyrics are all fucking basically nursery rhymes. Not like that Korn song, Shoots and Ladders, that is actually nursery rhymes, but they're basically like nursery rhyme level poetry. They look absolutely ridiculous. They are nothing if not nonsense, but they're fun nonsense.
I would prefer to listen to a CD of nursery rhymes than this track.
I think I've probably got some kicking around somewhere from when Elodie was younger. I can give you if you want.
or I could just play the Monster Magnet album.
That's a better idea. Should we go for the next track?
There's a fun story here about Cold Chamber, because you were talking about how objectively bad they were. I love how this is all written. So that year, Cold Chamber took part in Insane Clown Posse's Amazing Jekyll Brothers tour, along with musicians Biohazard, Crazy Bone, Twisted, Mindless Self-Indulgence. While Biohazard, Mindless Self-Indulgence, Crazy Bone and Twisted were well received by audiences, Cold Chamber was not. Insane Clown Posse fans were not purchasing tickets as they did not like the band.
Brilliant.
For the free shows that Cold Chamber played, there were multiple ticket refunds. ICP member Violent J and his brother Rob made the decision to eliminate Cold Chamber from the tour. After doing so, there were no ticket refunds for the remaining tour dates.
I mean, if you are using Insane Clown Posse fans as arbiters of taste, you've got to worry.
My opinion of Juggalos has gone up tenfold after that.
Brilliant. Right, let's go for the next one. No, this is Monster Magnet and See You in Hell, which was another one the album was released a few months earlier. This is from their Power Trip record. This is another one that is in the film. This is great. Power Trip is a fucking brilliant record.
Oh, just borderline perfection, that record. And this song is the best track on that album.
I think I prefer Dopes to Infinity, their previous record, because Negasonic Teenage Warhead is fucking amazing. But
I'm not angry with you for that
this is
opinion.
so good.
It's
yeah. Monster Magnet is so good.
really
This is a really jaunty, upbeat song with like Ace Farfis at organ playing until you realise what inspired the song. It was inspired by a hippie that Dave Windorf, the singer and guitarist, met on a bus that he was getting on quite well with, until the hippie told him that him and his wife had murdered their newborn baby. So he wrote a song inspired by that. So the best thing to do is pretend you don't know that, so you can go back to enjoying the song again, because it's fucking ace.
I did not know that, and I wish I didn't know that.
Yeah,
now.
it's horrible, but the song is fucking fantastic, and it's great.
I guess that puts the line, I saw a pattern on a blanket just the other day, it looked just like the pillow you threw away, into context, doesn't it?
Does, yes.
And that's always been a favourite line of mine, because I saw it as kind of like irony about wanting something and then giving up on it and then seeing something, but it's clearly not.
Go with that.
Go
with that meaning. That's a nicer meaning. Go with that one.
Yeah, I always kind of used that line. I was going to talk about how that particular line meant a lot to me, in how it kind of inspired my thoughts on never giving up on something, and if you do, it doesn't mean you can't have another go. But it's about fucking baby death. Shit in hell.
Oh, I've killed a song for you. Sorry.
But what it does show me is that, with the exception of... I'm ignoring Blisters, but 3 riffs in a row that... Oh, this album's so riffy. I don't even know if riff is a word. But every track has started with these riffs that just make me go, oh, yeah. And it doesn't stop here either. There's just riff after riff after riff, man.
That, oh, yeah, was very Dave Windorf as well.
Good, I'm glad.
There's a live version of Space Lord that we have recorded an episode talking about, but is going out in a few months' time, where he says, oh yeah, in the intro about 5 times.
But I also like about this track is that it's space-led.
Yeah.
And that's quite unusual. And it's still cool.
What's interesting is there's the really prominent organ on it, and there is nobody credited with playing it.
Yeah.
There are 3 guitarists in the band, and there are an extra 2 guitarists credited in the album, in the extra musicians. But nowhere in the credits on the album does it say anything about keyboards, organ, or anything like that. So,
good grief.
No idea who played it, but it's very good. Dev, what do you think about Monster Magnet?
I'm not too familiar with Monster Magnet. I guess the most familiarity I have with Monster Magnet is that they did the theme for Matt Hardy, version 1.0.
Right.
Brilliant.
Is that a wrestler?
Yes,
yeah. He was very big in the 2000s. A lot of this kind of music was in WWF.
Right.
And so this was, I think, there's the popularity of Matt Hardy, who was very much a regular guy, but if you needed a spot for a wrestling match, then he was going to jump off a ladder propped on top of another ladder and jump through another ladder.
Basically, hide your ladders. Right, let's go for the next one. Judas Priest and Bloodstained from their Jugulator record that came out pretty much exactly a year before. So this is the Tim Ripper Owens era of Judas Priest, in between Rob Halford and Rob Halford. It's okay, but if I'm going to put some Judas Priest on, it's going to be the early 80s stuff with, like, you know, British Steel or Screaming for Vengeance are generally the more fun albums. It's similar-ish sort of in style to Painkiller that they put out in the early 90s. But overall, I reckon this track sounds more like Slayer than Judas Priest, which isn't bad. It's just Slayer are better at being Slayer than Judas Priest are. I mean, the intro bit has got like full-on Seasons in the Abyss, sort of South of Heaven kind of vibes. And then Tim Ripper Owens sounds like Tom Araya more than he sounds like Rob Halford in the chorus, which is interesting because he got the job in Judas Priest by being a Rob Halford sound-alike in a Judas Priest tribute band. There's a movie called Rockstar with Mark Wahlberg in it, which was based on that story.
Is that the one where he gets his dick out?
I don't know, I've not seen it, but it's possibly.
No, the one where he gets his dick out is Boogie Nights. I was taking the piss. Mark Wahlberg.
Right, I have seen that one. That isn't about Judas Priest.
No. So the thing about Judas Priest is it's one of those bands that everyone expects me to have liked and got lots of opinions of and all their albums. I've hardly bothered with them. And I don't even know why.
Is that everyone assuming that you're going to like them because Rob Halford's gay?
No, it's people assuming that I like it because it's riffy metal and I was into riffy metal in the 90s. I remember this track. It's another hair whirler from Rockworld. But I didn't really get into Judas Priest ever. And I don't know why.
I think we're a bit young. I think if we were a decade older, then Judas Priest would have been one of the main bands we liked. But I think Painkiller was their last big record, really. And that was 1990, I think. Mid-90s was when I was really getting into stuff. So, like, when I was about 13 in 95. And, you know, by then, metal had moved on. You know, Pantera was so much heavier. You'd got Korn and Deftones introducing all the new metal stuff. I was listening to loads of like pop punk, like Green Day and Offspring and things like that. And Judas Priest just sounded like music that the old guys that I didn't really know were listening to, you know?
Do you think this was a tactical addition to the album then, essentially just to have the Judas Priest name on there because they still had a rep even though they were a fading star?
Possibly. It's not out of place at all. I think it fits with the rest of the stuff on there. I just don't think it's as good as the Slayer track that's doing a similar sort of thing. And it's not as good as other Slayer songs that are not on here that do an even more similar thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that as a bad thing, but I agree with you, Mark, that I think a few of these older bands are definitely on there for the namesake. Because like Slayer, that song coming up, that's the second song in the credits, so...
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the film, but like not everyone will instantly recognise Slayer as a song in this movie. So
plus, it's an exclusive song by Slayer, so it's a new unreleased song. On the label on the front says new unreleased songs by Slayer, Cold Chamber, Powerman 5000, and Kidney Thieves. Now, of those bands at that point, Powerman 5000 and Kidney Thieves were not a big draw at that point. Cold Chamber they were really hyped. They were on the front of Kerrang all the time. And Slayer were massive.
That's interesting than the draw of Judas Priest, because, again, this is just going from research, not my own experiences, but when I looked up Jugulator, that seemed to have gotten mixed reviews because of the change in the kind of musical stylings. And I definitely hear it, like, the guitars especially are they're very heavy, and they feel like they're trying to match the kind of emerging new metal tune.
Yeah, it's more groove metal than new metal, I think. I think they're trying to match... I mean, Slayer at this point also were changing their sound. This was the year that Slayer put out Diabolus in Musica, which is the album where they down-tuned to C#, which was basically where all the new metal bands were tuned to that were using 7-string guitars. And they got a lot of fucking stick for that. It's a pretty good album, but... it's so outside of what they were doing on all of their previous records and subsequently, because they went back to sounding like their previous records after that one. It's a total outlier. And it sounds more like Judas Priest sort of trying to match that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very interesting, this album being sort of a window into that musical change.
Yeah, it's like
in the era.
Like a time
because
capsule.
there are some bands here that are very new. I mean, a couple of them were like this is their debut album, and then there's other bands that have been around for decades, like years, that are just keeping up with the times.
Yeah. Right, let's go for the next song.
lit candles burning. A salty sweat drips from her breast. Her hips move, and I can feel what they're saying, swaying. They say the beast inside of me is gonna get ya, yeah.
Sorry, I nodded off.
Do I need to fight you? This is Typo Negative and Love You to Death. Not in the movie, despite saying that it is. This is not one of the ones on the back of the CD that has an asterisk saying song does not appear in the film. I rewatched the movie last night, concentrating all the way through, and this is not in there anywhere, although it would have fitted fucking perfectly thematic. But yeah, like I've said on a previous episode, October Rust, the album that this is from, is the second best goth metal record ever after Paradise Lost Draconian Times. And I will fight you, Mark, on this one if I fucking need to.
Sorry, I nodded off when you were talking as well. What did you say?
I know where you live. Well, I know the postcode.
Don't worry, Colin. I will tag team with you. I fucking adore Typo Negative.
They're amazing. Some people have no culture.
I agree with you. I think this song would have fit a scene really well in this, because it's not just like Chucky and Tiffany. You've also got Jesse and Jane. You've got this whole really dark Romeo and Juliet thing going on, and like it would have fit the scene when they're getting married versus Chucky and Tiffany murdering someone.
Yeah,
I think that could have worked really well there.
I had this album as a kid, and literally the Cold Chamber track and the Typo Negative track, they were the two that I would always immediately skip. I hardly listened to either of them after the first 2 or 3 listens because they both bored me to tears.
Alright, Screaming Cheetah Wheelies fan.
I love the Screaming Cheetah Wheelies track. I'm not a fan of the rest of their work, but that one track is a banger.
I will give Mark some leeway in that, in terms of track listing, it's fucking absurd that this is placed between Judas Priest and Slayer.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, the only reason I think that this is between Judas Priest and Slayer is because those two tracks are so similar, and it's to give them a bit of a barrier.
But then he's breaking it up so tonally a good idea.
Oh yeah, it means it absolutely does not work as an album in any fucking way. It's totally thrown together, the track listing on this, because it's not chronological how it, how the songs feature in the film, and I can see no logic to how this CD was put together at all, other than potentially I think there may have been some bits of record labels saying, well, we've got to go at track 3 or something like that.
So again, it's very similar to the free CDs on the front of
exactly
metal magazines, yeah.
The only sort of logical reason I can think of for some of this.
So I was reading an interview with the Chemical Brothers just after they released Surrender, and they'd struggled with the order that they did the tracks in.
Yeah.
And they'd come up with all these really kind of logical ways of doing it and didn't feel like it worked. So they literally just pulled them out of a hat as an attempt.
Right.
And that was what they went with for Surrender.
Quite often hear stories about bands struggling with the track listing that they want to go with on an album. I know that there's a fairly famous one of U2 when they put out, I think it may have been the Joshua Tree. Our co-host on Shipwrecked and Comatose, Kurt, will probably be shouting at us if I've got this wrong now. Basically, the band couldn't decide on the track listing, so the producer got possibly his wife, maybe his girlfriend, either way it was Kirsty MacColl. They just gave her the tracks and went, you decide, come back to us, see what you think of what order they should go in. And she came back with this really good order, and they were like, how did you decide that? And she went, right, well, that one's my favourite, so I put it first. That one's my second favourite, so I put it second.
Magnificent.
It's either Joshua Tree or Unforgettable Fire, I think. But yeah, it was one of them massive 80s records. But yeah, I really like this. I think it's fucking great. Let's go for the next track. This is Slayer and Human Disease. This is an exclusive track, and like Dev said earlier, it's the second end credit song. So this is on here so that they could have an exclusive Slayer track. And it's definitely not top tier Slayer. It's not up there with Angel of Death, but it's still pretty good. Paul Bostap's drumming on this, because this was while he was the drummer rather than Dave Lombardo. The drumming's fucking great. And, yeah. I like it.
I think it's acceptable, Slayer. I enjoy this track a lot. It's not a favourite on the album, but it's still a great song.
Yeah, but it doesn't reach the heights of their absolute classics. You wouldn't be disappointed if you'd gone to see them live and it wasn't in the set list, because I don't think I probably never played this.
But what would you expect from an exclusive track? Surely they wouldn't give you an absolute banger. Surely.
That happens. Look at the Crow soundtrack. You know, some of the exclusive tracks on there. I mean, the Cure track on The Crow is my favourite song by my favourite band.
It's definitely up there as one of my favourite Cure tracks as well. It's a massive banger.
Yeah. So it can happen, but yeah, this was never put out anywhere else until they had a career retrospective box set, well over a decade later that it featured on. I mean, of the exclusive tracks, the Cold Chamber track had already been released as a B-side, but only in the UK. And the Powerman 5000 track was on their next album. So it was just this and the Kidney Thieves track, as far as I know, that weren't released elsewhere on another album.
And it's perfectly acceptable, meaty metal, but...
What's your general thoughts on Slayer anyway? Are they a band you were particularly into?
No, but I like their popular stuff.
Yeah. You ever see them live?
No.
I saw them 3 or 4 times, I think. Possibly a few more than that, actually. Yeah, I saw them at Download a few times, and then I saw them on their farewell tour when they played Birmingham with Anthrax and Obituary and Lamb of God supported. And I mainly went for Anthrax, but all 4 bands were great. Dev, what are you thinking on this one?
And it does exactly what it says on the tin, you know. It's appropriate that it is the song that people will hear when they're leaving the theatre, because this sounds exactly like the kind of music that Chucky fans would be listening to when they go to the cinema.
Yeah. Stereotyping, but probably correct. Cool. I think we'll go for the next song. So this is Stabbing Westward and So Wrong. I don't think this is Stabbing Westward's best work, but it's still pretty good. It's got a good groove to it. It's quite bouncy, isn't it? But I do think it sounds a little bit weak after the Slayer track, which I suppose a lot of things are, because the Slayer track is so much heavier. But it's like they're going for a similar guitar tone, and it's just not quite as heavy. But I like it. It's good. And the breakdown section towards the end is utterly fantastic.
I mean, this is my second favourite on the album, and that's because I am an absolutely huge Stabbing Westwards fan.
Yeah.
It's probably fair to say that they're one of my favourite bands of all time.
Were you already into them at this point, or is this one of the things that introduced them to you?
I was already into them. I'd already got Darkest Days. I hadn't expanded onto their earlier stuff, but I had got Darkest Days, and that was basically on repeat in my student digs. They're so fucking emo, and I don't care.
I was trying to think which the album that I had of theirs was. Ungod from '94.
Yes.
That is
fantastic
such a great
album.
Record. Yeah.
I think I prefer Darkest Days, but I think a lot of the time when you get into a band, the first album you ever get of theirs tends to be your favourite, right?
Yeah. I didn't get that record until maybe 99, 2000-ish, because it was when I was at college, and it was my guitar teacher there was selling a load of his old CDs. Brilliant record. The rest of the stuff that I've heard by them, I don't think I've heard any of the full albums. But Torn Apart is amazing. That's on
Darkest Days.
Yeah, it's on Torn Apart's on Darkest Days, isn't it?
Yeah. I think for me, this kind of track is what I describe as having lots going on, but I like it.
Yeah, because you've got the cool little sort of twinkly keyboard bits and stuff as well as the riffs. Dev, what are your thoughts on this one?
I really liked it. I really enjoyed the song. You touched upon it being a song of theirs being in Clerks.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't know who this band was. I thought I was unfamiliar with Stabbing Westward, but they are peak cinematic butt rock. Again, a compliment. But it is absurd the amount of airtime they had in 90s movies. They were in Clerks, Bad Boys, Johnny Mnemonic, Mortal Kombat, Escape from LA, Spawn, Urban Legend, Tekken, The Faculty, Not Another Teen Movie, and they did the title track for the main menu of Duke Nukem Time to Kill.
I love that you did that research. I just think they're dead good and I've bought all their CDs, yo.
I mean, they were all over the fucking place during the 90s.
Yeah. Awesome. Right, let's go for the next track. This is Powerman 5000, Son of X51. Not in the movie, although it's not one of the one on the CD that claims it's not in the movie. It's totally fictional which ones aren't in the movie and which ones are on the back of the CD.
Fucking mad that. How could you get that so fucking wrong? And also, where the bloody hell is Call Me by Blondie, damn it?
They wouldn't let them have the rights, most likely. Yeah, so this was an exclusive track at this point, but it was on Tonight the Stars Revolt, their record the following year, which was their sort of big breakthrough record. That's the one that's got
When Worlds Collide?
When Worlds Collide on it, yeah. Which is their big single, because it was in it was in Tony Hawk's.
Their best song.
That album's fucking great.
It is, but I do feel, to some extent, that this was a favour to Rob Zombie.
I think this was a bargaining chip for them not being allowed to put Living Dead Girl on there. I think Rob Zombie went, can I have a track by my brother's band?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Powerman 5000 were basically the sci-fi equivalent to White Zombie's horror. It's a bit like Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000. and Fallout and Skyrim. it's
I'd never thought of that metaphor comparison before, but fucking hell if you're not bang on the money.
It's great. If you like one, you'll probably like the other. But this is all like 50s futuristic, and they're both still really cartoony and like bouncy industrial metal, and they're both fucking great. Tonight the Stars Revolt is definitely worth about 39 minutes of your time if you've not heard it. It's a fantastic record.
Yeah, and I think this is just a fun track with a weird singer who's got a very distinctive voice, and that feels right for this album, even though it wasn't in the film.
Yeah, they're still going. They've put out quite a few records recently. There was one a couple of years ago where they did it was a covers record of mostly loads of 80s songs, which has got a really good version of Echo and the Bunnymen's Killing Moon on it.
I didn't know they were still going. Is he still calling himself Spider Zombie, or
he's never been Spider Zombie? He's Spider One.
Okay. I thought he was called Spider Zombie.
No, he's always been Spider One.
He did the Nick Cage thing, where he changed his name to avoid the nepotism.
Yeah, yeah, he changed it from Spider Capola. But it's always been very well known that he is Rob Zombie's brother.
Yeah, I mean, you can change the name, but then they still sound the same.
Right. Everybody knows that Joe Hill is Stephen King's kid, right? I didn't until very, very recently. Whereas I always knew that Spider was really Spider Zombie.
I believe both of their surnames actually Straker, I think. I think it's Rob Straker and Spider Straker, maybe. Haven't got a clue what Spider actually
Straker was his alias during White Zombie. I think the early albums he went as Rob Straker.
Yeah.
His real name is Bart J. Cummings.
Yes. Yeah, I knew it was Cummings, actually, you're right. Yes,
Brilliant.
Yeah, Let Them Die Slowly is credited as Rob Straker. Yeah.
Spider Cummings sounds like a delicacy.
And on that note, we should probably move on to the next song.
I'm veggie, by the way.
I don't know if that counts.
Oh,
that
shit,
that might be just
eggs.
vegan.
Yeah.
This has gone down
And after that, I might go vegan.
Right, next song. Who had that in their notes? Who expected that to turn up?
This is the maze of life. This is the maze of death. This is the matrix of eternity.
So this is Bruce Dickinson and Trumpets of Jericho. This is another one where it was on his current album that came out like less than a month before. I dig the riffs on this, and obviously Bruce Dickinson's vocals are great, but I don't think the style fits together.
Well, my issue with the track is it's called Trumpets of Jericho. There ain't no trumpet on this track.
I think Bruce Dickinson's voice just sounds wrong when it's not on gallopy Iron Maiden riffs, which is why the chorus sounds fine, because I could hear Iron Maiden playing that. But the sort of groove metal riffs in the verses are so un-Maiden-like that his really distinctive Iron Maiden voice just sounds really jarring with it.
Yeah, it sounded so much like the same thing with Judas Priest in that track.
Yeah,
That they're changing the instrumental music, but not the vocals.
yeah. But, I mean, he can't change his voice. That is Bruce Dickinson's voice.
Yeah.
You know,
I love his voice, but I think you're right.
if he started singing like fucking Glenn Benton from Deicide, doing the fucking death growls, that would not be right at all, would it? Plus, he would wreck his operatic. Excellent voice.
Another thing I think I have to say about Bruce Dickinson is I do love his voice, but I fucking hate his politics.
Yeah. I don't think he's quite as bad as Morrissey. But
Oh no, there's a line.
but yeah, he's a bit Brexity, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a bit Brexity.
Yeah. This song's grown on me over listening to it a bit, but at first I really was not digging it. In the movie, though, you only hear the riff. It cuts out before he starts singing, because it's like Dev said, it's one of those transition-y bits. It's just when they're setting off in the van and then it cuts to another scene really quickly. But he was a big name that they probably wanted on the soundtrack to sell it, probably.
Oh yeah, that's without a doubt.
If Ian was here and wasn't on paternity leave, I know he was a bit more of a fan of Bruce Dickinson's solo stuff, so he might have a bit more to say about it, but it totally passed me by. I wasn't really into Maiden yet, even at this point in 98. But Ian's first ever gig was a Bruce Dickinson solo gig. So, yeah.
Nice.
Dev, what you thinking, mate?
Yeah, I like Iron Maiden. I wasn't as familiar with Bruce's solo stuff, but yeah, I think you're right in the money with this. It's perfectly serviceable. It's fine, you know. I like listening to it. It's not an off or a wrong kind of note for this album. I think people who buy this album will enjoy the song. Again, though, it's like when you look at the movie, this is an odd thing to listen to the soundtrack and then watch the movie, because so many of these songs are almost mistreated in how blasé they're just thrown into the movie.
Well, there's a lot to fit in, because the movie's only 90 minutes long, and you've got Graham Revell's score as well.
Yeah, there is not actually as many musical, like, big needle drops in the film as the soundtrack suggests. A lot of it is, like, just incidental scoring.
Right, let's go for the next song. So this is Static X and Bled for Days. This is a track that was exclusive at the point of release. It doesn't say that on the label on the front because nobody knew who Static X were at this point, because this is their first ever release of anything. They'd not put out an EP, they'd not put out a single yet. Their album didn't come out for another year.
Who the fuck was sucking whose dick to get Static X on this album?
Well, they were signed at that point, so there would have been A&R people involved in saying, we've got this band, we think it will fit really well.
Yeah, if I remember in my research, they had been around for a few years. I think it took a while for them to make their first album.
But, yeah, I'm glad it is, because I fucking love Static X. That first record, Wisconsin Death Trip, is so good. They'd only been signed in February 98, so by the time that they signed up to be on the soundtrack album, that's probably only got to have been a couple of months since they'd signed their record label. They were basically a nu metal version of Ministry, which I like nu metal, I like Ministry. This is a good combination. And even they put an album out about 2 years ago, which is obviously a posthumous one for Wayne Static. He'd been recording an album before he died, so he'd got all these vocal tracks, and they built the rest of the album around it, and it's really good, which you wouldn't expect from the way that was made to be as good as it is.
Static X are a band I have always thought that I should have listened to a lot more of. They're one of those bands where, oh, what's this? This is dead good. Static X. A few months later, what's this? I think I've heard this before. It's Static X.
Yeah.
And they're just one of those bands I've never got round to. And I think it all started when I heard this track on this soundtrack. Yeah, it's a favourite. Yeah, I never bothered, whereas I bought...
You wouldn't have heard it before that.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is subsequently I've never got into them, whereas I bought the fucking Screaming Cheetah Wheelies album and I bought the Monster Magnet album because I got this album at the time. I bought this probably just a few weeks after it was released.
Well, if you bought the other two albums in fairly quick succession after this came out, Static X hadn't got anything else out yet, so perhaps you'd forgotten by
Maybe.
then.
But yeah, they've always been a band I've intended to listen to more of since 1998, and I never have.
I remember first, because I didn't have this album at the time, so I first heard them when the album was released the following year, and me and Ian used to DJ at the jailhouse in Tamworth, and Ian had got the album, and I remember him bringing it down and playing it, and we used to DJ on a Monday night when there was me, Ian, and a guy called Gumby that used to DJ with us, and Gumby's brother, and that was all of the people that were in the pub, while 3 of the 4 people, apart from the bar staff, were DJing. So we could basically play whatever the fuck we wanted, and I definitely remember us playing more than one track off this album throughout the course of one evening. It's fucking great. It still stands up really well as well.
It's just a weird-ass anomaly for me because I would say 3 soundtrack albums around this time completely influenced my taste for the next 2-3 years. It was obviously the Bride of Chucky one, but also the Matrix album and the Spawn album completely revolutionised my world. It was stuff like Dabbing Westwards, stuff like the Crystal Method.
Yeah.
All of these bands that are still absolute favourites of mine were heavily, heavily influenced by those 3 soundtrack albums.
Yeah. It serves exactly the same purpose as the free CDs, which is what our podcast is about. So that's great.
Can we do the Spawn soundtrack? Can we do the Matrix soundtrack?
Me and you have done a podcast on the Spawn soundtrack before.
I know.
I think like 3 of these bands are on the Spawn soundtrack.
Yes. Slayer are, Stabbing Westward are.
Stabbing Westwards.
No, just 2. I don't think there's any others.
Yeah, I mean, they all tend to cross over. I know a few of these bands are on the Freddy vs. Jason soundtrack, which is another big new metal compilation.
There were so many similar sort of CDs at the time, and I used to pick quite a lot of them up. Like the less successful ones I used to get from What Records in Nuneaton. They used to have a rack of like CDs for £3, and they used to end up with loads. I got the Ginger Snap soundtrack from there. I got the Escape from LA soundtrack, which is really fucking good. I'm sure there are a few others as well. Oh, I think I got the Idle Hands one as well from there. So
You are just naming some of the best films of all time
Yeah.
right now, Colin.
And most of them are the best films of all time because of the soundtracks.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. As flippant as I'm being, music around this time was when I was most into music, and the films that were influenced by the kind of music I liked do stick in my memory. Obviously, they had to be good films,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right that the soundtracks are iconic and important.
I mean, Spawn is a bad film. But the soundtrack
Shush
is
now.
fucking great.
Spawn definitely needs to learn that less is more when it comes to CGI, but yeah, I think it would have been instantly forgettable without the soundtrack. You're absolutely right.
Definitely. Right, let's go for the next song.
Looking good, stepping out, looking for romance. Crazy arms, crazy legs, save me the last dance. Hold me to
So this is Motorhead and Love for Sale. So this was from their album released this year. I don't know why I knew this one, but I really did. So I'm not sure if it maybe got a bit of airplay on the Radio 1 Rock Show at the time, or it may be that it got played down the jailhouse when I was going down there. I don't think we were playing it on the Monday, but I was usually there on the Monday, the Wednesday, the Friday and the Saturday. So it may have been played by one of the other DJs a fair bit then. This song is utterly fucking brilliant. This deserves to be up there with Ace of Spades and Overkill as their best known songs. This is a really good song. I mean, it's got an absolutely massive chorus. I think it would work really well just stripped down on an acoustic guitar as well. In fact, I might learn it and start, covering it if I ever go back to doing gigs again.
Yeah, it's an exceptionally good Motorhead song, but I haven't ever heard it played anywhere other than when I've played this album, and I've got no idea why.
Which is weird. That's totally the opposite experience because I didn't have this album, but I definitely knew it when I played it. So that suggests to me then that it would be more of it was played in Tamworth. So maybe one of the other DJs had picked up on it and played it at the jailhouse rather than it getting...
Do either of you know if it was released as a single?
I don't know. I think it was, but I don't know if Motorhead were doing much with singles at the time. It may have just been a radio single or something like that, but even then, Kerrang! Radio didn't exist yet for another 6 years or so. It would have got video. The video may have been played on MTV Super Rock, but I didn't have MTV. But yeah, I will have heard this either at the jailhouse in Tamworth or at XL's Rock Club in Birmingham then, in that case, where we were sneaking along to when I was underage. Dev, any thoughts on this one?
I think we've made the point with Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, but contrasted with those two tracks, this is such a whiff of fresh air because this is an older band not bowing to the trends at the time. This is like really, really good Motorhead, as you know them.
Yeah, they aren't changing
True.
their sound in any way. They probably couldn't change their sound in any way. And that's a good thing. It's like the Ramones. You wouldn't want them sounding like anyone else. You want all of their albums to sound like exactly the fucking same, but fucking brilliant. AC/DC are the same. It's great. I love Motorhead. And
Sorry, was that but fucking brilliant or but fucking brilliant?
I believe it was but fucking brilliant with a gap. But if you want to take it that way, you can, Mark.
Either of those things work for me.
I'll just say, the Chucky franchise has had a few cameos over the years, and if they're getting Motorhead in for this, around this time Lemmy was in a few horror films, so if they'd gotten him in, Bride would have been even better.
Definitely. Lemmy was amazing.
Yeah, he was.
I think when he died, that's where everything started to go wrong.
No, that was when Bowie died, but...
Lemmy died about 2.5 weeks before Bowie. So, yeah.
Right. Then fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck this world.
They were the two pillars holding the world together, holding the universe together. Right, let's go for the penultimate song on the compact disc.
Crazy, I'm crazy for feeling so lonely.
This is Kidney Thieves and Crazy. This was exclusive at this point, but it was later released on Zero Space in 2002. This, I don't think, is a good example of Kidney Thieves. I think they've done much, much better stuff. There's bits in this that are good, but the vocal line, she stuck to the same tune as the original version of this song, but the chords in the background have absolutely no relation to it. So there are bits where she's singing as if the chord has changed, but the chords are still playing the same riff. And it's really fucking jarring to my ears.
Oh, I thought it was quite fun, nasty, angry, punky goodness. Did you spot the glaringly obvious thing that I never spotted in 1998 about this track?
Possibly not.
It's the only track on the entire album that features a woman as its vocalist.
I had that in my
You're right,
notes, yeah.
It is. No, hold on. No, it fucking isn't. Sean Yuzult is the bass player in White Zombie.
I said on vocals.
On vocals, then yes. Unless you count
Yeah.
the vocal samples in the next track.
Which I don't.
No, that's fair.
I mean, in the film we get Blondie, but I get, yeah, your point stands. Like, I don't know why this soundtrack, it's literally called The Bride of Chucky. I don't know why there aren't more female new metal rock singers on this.
There weren't
album.
many.
Would you like my sophisticated reason for you for that, Dev? 90s misogyny, mate. 90s misogyny.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They could have made an absolutely fucking... I mean, this is a good soundtrack. It's a lot of fun. But yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Stick a couple of fucking Riot Girl tracks in there or something, because that would fit absolutely with Tiffany's character.
I hate slagging it off. I really do. But as soon as I was listening to it kind of critically for this podcast, it stuck out like a sore thumb, and it kind of kicked me in my late teens.
Yeah.
It really hurt. And I was like, shit a brick. And then I went back and thought about what I was listening to in the 90s, the late 90s. Fuck all female vocalists. Like, they weren't there. You couldn't access them. They weren't promoted. Insane.
Well, there were, because I was listening to a fair bit, but there were nowhere near as many. But in 98, I was definitely listening to Human Waste Project. I was definitely listening to Tura Satana. I was definitely listening to Jack Off Jill around about this sort of time. So there were a lot of the sort of gothier end of nu metal sort of...
Yeah, I mean, I was listening
female
to
singers.
Sneaker Pimps and Portishead quite a lot at this time,
Yeah.
but you understand what I'm getting at,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
1 in 15 is not a good ratio.
Definitely, yeah. There absolutely should be more representation, as there always should.
I'm sure they've got plenty of airtime in other ones, but I always think when I listen to a soundtrack like this, and that is the critical side of butt rock, that the audience, the demographic is extremely dude bro.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, two bands that were, I mean, we talk about, like, the big bands that get, name recognition, but two bands that were huge during the 90s were Hole
Yep.
and Garbage. And
Yeah.
I don't think you see them as much in these kind of soundtracks.
No, Hole tended to turn up a fair bit on... Hole were on the second and third Crow soundtrack, both doing covers. There's a Fleetwood Mac cover and a Bob Dylan cover on both of those. But... yeah, Garbage tended to be a bit more later on. They tended to be on soundtracks, but it was a bit more they weren't on the rock soundtracks. They were on the pop soundtracks like Romeo and Juliet, and
Yeah.
they did that Bond film later on, didn't they? World is not enough.
Yeah. I remember they have a really good needle drop. The I Only Like It When It Rains song.
Yeah, Only Happy When It
That-
Rains. Yeah.
Yeah, that drops in an X-Files episode with Bruce Campbell, and it's a
Brilliant.
really good drop.
I've got a vague recollection of that. Yeah. I may have to rewatch that at some point. Awesome. Should we go for the final song on the CD?
Let's do it.
Because it's the only time anybody's going to listen to it.
You are so dead. You are so dead. You are so dead. You are so dead.
You know me. You know me. You know me.
This is so bad.
It really is, isn't it? So this is Graham Revell and We Belong Dead. So this is a track that doesn't feature in the movie anywhere, despite Graham Revell doing the
Funny that.
soundtrack. It's ridiculously dated, massively overuses the dialogue samples that are really badly cut up, and is going to be skipped, always, by 99% of listeners.
So, for me, my notes read, as such, sounds like a podcast theme. Dev did a better job on Forever Friday.
That's saying something. It has that vibe to it, where it feels like the start of some kind of remix, but then it never got finished, and you just put it out as a work in progress.
It's poor.
I know it kind of goes into a quote-unquote chorus, but it feels like maybe the first bit of it could lead into, like, actual guitars and, you know, actual music, but it just never goes anywhere.
It's just a bit poo, isn't it? You know.
For people who aren't massively into CHUCKYVISION and stuff, I realised I was a bit kind of gatekeepery there. Forever Friday is Dev's podcast about Friday the 13th.
I did a similar job in making the intro for Friday, but I was very much aware that my intro was terrible.
I mean, it did feel like it was ironic, and I'm glad you're not insulted, but you definitely did a better job than this.
I've already forgotten. What's the metal song I used for it? I mixed the vocals to Let the Bodies Hit the Floor over banjo music.
Of course you did. Excellent.
Why wouldn't you?
And that makes about as much sense as this song.
I think we've pretty much run this one into the ground then, haven't we?
It kind of goes full circle back to when we talked about how the Cheetah Wheelies maybe had blackmail over the soundtrack.
The Cheetah Wheelies definitely didn't have blackmail.
Apparently they've got it over Mark
maybe-
as well.
No, they've got their one good song over me.
I can only imagine Graham Revell said that he would take his soundtrack back if they didn't put this in.
I'd have thought he'd be embarrassed by it, because he's not a bad soundtrack guy. He's done decent incidental music. But this isn't a good example. But yeah, that brings us to the end of this episode then. So thanks for joining me, guys. Do you want to tell the Through With This Month's Issue listeners where they can find CHUCKYVISION?
It's on the same network where we made this. It's pretty much available wherever you can get
That's
podcasts.
pretty much the same for Through With This Month's Issue for the CHUCKYVISION listeners. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this, either of you that are listening to... Either of you, that sounds like there's only two people listening. If you've enjoyed this...
No, that's my old podcast right in the childhood.
Either streams of listeners that haven't listened to the other one, subscribe to whichever one you haven't already, and tell all your friends. This has been Through With This Month's Issue versus CHUCKYVISION. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. Bye!
Bye.
Another endearingly shambolic podcast from WeDigPodcasts.com.
If you're a fan of British comedy, particularly broadcast on the BBC, that's been going for a decade or three, try Shipwrecked and Comatose, covering all of Red Dwarf, including those additional specials, heroes and their foes, anything else, well, who knows? So find us on your podcast apps and be greeted by some friendly chaps and Mark's deep obsession with all cats. It's Shipwrecked and Comatose. We're not on Insta, it's Twitter's hard mode. Red Dwarf Pods are social. Both subscribe and enjoy us a load.